So when we're talking about one-dimension vectors, we can actually just use the signs, a positive or a negative sign, to represent directions. So if we're talking about x vectors here, they can either go to the right or to the left. Now, if we're talking about position, we would use the positive values of position to just mean to the right of wherever you've defined your origin to be. And a negative would mean to the left of wherever you've defined your origin to be. So for a position vector, positive and negative just means to the right of the origin or to the left of the origin. What's important to understand is it's different if we're talking about the velocity vectors or the acceleration vectors. And in this case, we're still thinking about one dimension in x. If your velocity vector is to the right, not your position, but just the direction that you're traveling, which way your speed is pointed, in that case, positive is to the right and negative is to the left. So obviously, if I'm walking, I would always have a positive speed, but we would call walking to the left a negative velocity vector. So similarly with acceleration, if your acceleration vector points to the right, we call that positive, and if the acceleration vector points to the left, we call that negative. This is one place where a lot of students struggle because they assume that speeding up means positive acceleration and that slowing down means negative acceleration. That isn't actually how we're going to be dealing with it quantitatively. To the right is positive and to the left is negative. And in later videos, we will talk more about how you actually calculate and work with those acceleration vectors. So those were the x directions. Now we can also work in other directions, such as in this case y, and typically we define in the y direction, which we can think of as up-down, up to be the positive direction. Now you can define it otherwise, but you need to make it very clear to me in your work that that's what you're doing, since in general, up is positive. So we would say that a positive direction, a positive position, means above the origin, where the origin might, for instance, be the floor surface, where a negative position is then below the origin. So just like in the x direction, the signs on our velocity and acceleration vectors then indicate a direction. So if an object is headed upwards, it has a velocity vector pointed up, that would be positive. If it's heading downwards, it has a velocity vector pointing down, it's negative. Similarly, for acceleration, remember that this doesn't mean speeding up or slowing down, but if it has an acceleration vector pointed up, that would be positive, and an acceleration vector pointed down, that is negative.